Uh, what we're doing is really a revival of what we've done on community weekends past. I've approached several members and asked them if they would like to share their personal stories, specifically with regard to how they came to ethical culture, what their backgrounds were in terms of their the values that they were brought up with in their families, their religious backgrounds, if any, and how they worked their way to a humanistic worldview, finally landing at the Ethical Culture Society of Bergen County. And I've asked each of our members, our guests, to talk for no more than 10 minutes about that. And I'm happy to say, rather than 3, which is the standard number of members we've had in the past participating, we actually have 4 this morning, I'm happy to say, representing various degrees of tenure in the society. Let me tell you who our guests are. We'll lead off with Ed Gross, who, from the point of view of tenure, is really by far our senior member here. And then I've asked Allison Goldstein, who is good enough to share her story. Allison is, I believe, the newest, I'm quite sure is the newest of our 4 members. Then we'll move from Allison to Matt Kelly, who will talk about his background and his movement to ethical culture. And again, through the wizardry of Zoom, we're able to include Peter Herring, who will talk about his move from his own background to humanism and then finding his way to the Bergen Ethical Society all the way from Driesbruggen, Holland. So let's lead off with, and after everyone has spoken, we'll have an opportunity for anyone who is here to ask any questions that you might have of any of the 4 guests. So let me start off with Ed. Ed, tell us your story.
Good morning. Well, I can sum up my religious background with a very short story. My parents moved to Florida in 1982, sometime after that. So I'm not sure quite when. I was probably in my 40s or 50s. It struck me that I had gone to Hebrew school for a couple of years and graduated and had my bar mitzvah, and that my parents never attended temple. They had no interest in religious Judaism and secular Judaism only. And so I went up to my mom and I said, you know, why is that? Why was I bar mitzvah? Why did you do that? Why have me bar mitzvah? And she said, well, you wanted to. It was me. I apparently had decided. It seems that growing up in Teaneck, a lot of my friends were Jewish and they were going to Hebrew school. And I guess probably around 5th grade, it occurred to me that I wanted to be one of the gang. And so I spent a couple of years in Hebrew school. The only thing I remember enjoying about it was actually learning Hebrew. I didn't learn a lot, but I was interested in the language. But the religion itself just never clicked with me. We didn't even celebrate high holidays growing up. We didn't light candles for Passover or Shabbat or whatever. So I had a completely secular upbringing that way. And I think had I not married Diana, I would probably have lived an entirely secular life without the religion that I now adhere to, which is ethical culture, humanism. Our daughter got to be about 5 years old, and she was starting to ask questions. And Diana, who had grown up and sent to Catholic school from a young age, right through the high school before she turned secular, had a strong feeling about the importance of community and the idea of presenting our values in a way beyond just trying to teach little lessons with morals and trying to model the best behavior we could for our kids. So she was interested in finding a place for us to go. And she happened to have been invited to sing one morning at Ethical Culture. And she heard Joe speak about Ronald Reagan's, this shows you how far back this goes, about Ronald Reagan's education policies, and being a teacher herself. And it really impressed her. She liked what Joe had to say. She liked the involvement of the community and the questions that were asked from the congregation or audience, depending on how religious you are. And so she came back. She remembered that when we decided it was time to look for some place to park ourselves and bring up our daughter and later our son. They both went through the Sunday school. So does that answer your question, Joe? Or if you
yes, that does answer. Well, if it's satisfactory to you, it's satisfactory to me. It's your story. So,
right. I mean, it's hard to point to any particular turning point for me as far as going from just a sense of what's right, a sense of what's fair, a sense of how the world ought to work, to actually turning that into religious beliefs, and which it was really only done after we joined the Ethical Culture Society in the early 80s.
Okay, very good. So there was no radical break, so to speak, in your sort of religio-philosophical orientation.
No, because I was fertile ground for ethical culture, because there was really nothing formal there to have to fight against. Ideas of ethical culture many of them were ideas that I was brought up with just because my parents modeled good behavior and wanted the world to become a better place for everyone.
Okay, Ed, thank you very much. I suspect some of our members will have some questions for you afterwards, but thanks for leading off with your story. I'd like to turn next to Allison Goldstein, who I mentioned is really our newest member, but as far as I remember, Allison, ethical culture was not totally foreign to your background. So why don't you go ahead and tell us your story in your own words?
Am I unmuted?
Okay. Yes, you are.
I'm coming through loud and clear. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for asking me.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I think
that was easy.
We had a very fun conversation, if you don't mind me bringing it up. And the conversation went something like this. Sure, I would be delighted to speak, but it may be a bit of a rehash of what I initially told you. And Joe said, don't worry, nobody will remember. And I thought my life story was so deeply compelling that everybody would remember.
Well,
and it was a very humbling moment.
Well, it was a joke, so don't take it personally.
I absolutely did not. I've been laughing ever since you called.
Right.
I want to say that following Ed, that he had a really religious background compared to mine, just to give you a perspective. My parents both were Jewish, but secular probably isn't even a strong enough way to describe their personas. We were a family that, despite the fact that we were Jewish, my earliest memories were of Christmas trees and singing Christmas carols. And I want to say, if you want to find one way to alienate the most number of people at one time, it would be to have Jewish parents who celebrate Christmas. We seem to alienate every Jew in the neighborhood, and we alienated every Christian. And that's not easy. That is not easy. Our roots in my family are very deep with ethical culture. My mother was educated at Fieldston. Many of you are probably familiar with Fieldston. And my parents were married by, I think, a rather legendary leader at ethical culture, Howard Radis. And I can attest to it because I was at the wedding. It was a second marriage. And I attended the Queens chapter of Ethical as a child. Shout out to Alan Berger, because my first day at Platform, Alan said, "Oh, I used to go to that Ethical chapter," which made me feel very at home. Our leader was Mel Grupp, who I believe you knew rather well, Joe?
Yes, I did know Mel, yes.
Yeah. Then as a teenager, I went to a youth organization, which I think has now been updated, but at the time it was called the National Ethical Youth Organization. Maybe Samantha can correct me if I'm wrong. It's now been replaced by, yes, is that or I don't know if I have the right name.
That's right.
She'll correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct. Youth for Ethical Societies.
And then as I matured, my parents seemed to drift away. I think it became obvious, at least to my father, that it was a very progressive movement and he wasn't ready to progress. I think that's the best way I can put it. Although I think he had many very fond connections with Ethical, specifically that his marriage had been officiated by somebody from Ethical. I think it just became too progressive for him, but not for me. My heart was still there. And when Lenny and I married 30 some odd years ago, like every other Jewish family, we wanted to raise our daughter with a sense of identity and a sense of roots. So having had absolutely no Jewish education, no bat mitzvah, nothing like that, I immediately enrolled myself in a class on Judaism so I could speak with some intelligence to my child. And I didn't really embrace what I was hearing, but living here in Bergen County, it seemed like everybody was always something. So we picked Jewish. And you know, the fact that it's called organized religion, it was too organized and too much religion for someone like me. And so that didn't really take. Lenny and I sort of were in a middle ground for a long time. We had a Jewish identity, but we really just didn't connect with any particular group. And I regularly drove along River Road, which you may or may not be aware, there's a sign that says Bergen County Ethical. And every time I passed that sign, it was like somebody was giving me a little tap. You know, these are your roots. As a matter of fact, the sign really should have read, Allison, why don't you consider coming back? So we retired and we suddenly had a lot of time on our hands. And so I said to Lenny, would you be willing, because this was not his experience, would you be willing, could we just go to one platform? That's what I negotiated for, just one. And I was successful in my negotiation. And I have to tell you, I felt sort of nervous. I was coming back after all these years. I was sort of an outsider. Well, I must say, thanks to David Bland, Susan Lesh, and Joe Schumann, I didn't really get a chance to be nervous. That had been my plan, to be awkward and nervous. And they sort of just didn't give me the room to be that. And I heard Lenny whispering in my ear, I really like these people. Like he was sort of confessing like a secret. You know, that David Bland, he's really very cool. So I said, maybe we should go to a second platform. And I was still sort of negotiating with Lenny. We hadn't really committed just yet. And, you know, I don't remember that period you're supposed to feel new. We just seemed to bypass new and went straight for, I guess we're joining. And so now here we are. And then I got the ultimate affirmation that I was in the right place. I attended the first women's dinner, immediately felt a part of things. And a lady was listening very carefully to my roots and my story. And she said, I think we're related. So I thought she meant it in sort of a charming way. And it turned out after she did her family tree and heritage, we in fact are cousins. And you probably know my cousin, Elaine Fondiller. And I said, well, if that isn't a sign that this was meant to be, well, I mean, Joe's probably my grandfather, or there's probably some other Jewish geography there. And that was really what kind of sealed the deal for me. And here I am.
Isn't that great? What a lovely story. So you found your family in ethical culture.
Literally and figuratively.
Right. Isn't that great? Well, we're so happy to have you, Allison. It's really great. You and Lenny. Thank you very much for feeling comfortable enough as a newbie to be able to share your story with us. Thank you so very much. I want to move next to another member who is sort of new, not quite as new as you are, Allison, but someone who's been with us for, I guess, almost 2 years now, and that's Matt Kelly. Matt, are you with us?
Hello.
Hello. Greetings. Good morning.
Thanks, Joe, for asking me to share. Hi, everybody. Good to see all your faces. My story, I grew up in the North Shore of Massachusetts, and my religious background is mostly non-existent. That my dad's side of the extended family is a Boston Catholic, large family, lots of practicing Catholics, many large families, so lots and lots of first cousins, and a big family spread out around the Massachusetts area and elsewhere in the country. So I went to some Catholic masses as a kid for things like a family Easter or a funeral or a wedding, and was familiar with the Catholic Church, but we weren't practicing. My mom's side of the family was Greek Orthodox, and also very much practicing as she grew up, and most of her family of origin active in the Greek Orthodox faith. Neither of my parents were very interested. They had both broken from those traditions pretty cleanly before having us. And I think they had a moment, which, I'll get to our parallel moment, Lindsay and my parallel moment in a second, of, I think similar to what Allison just described of, they had my sister and myself. I have a younger sister. And at some moment said, we're not giving them any religious education. We're not giving them any ethical education. So maybe we should shop around to local churches. And I think if they had known about ethical culture or found it, we may have been here as kids. So they did not find it. We went to a few Catholic masses. We went to a Greek church. We may have gone to a Unitarian or something. I don't have a very clear memory of that, but we did sort of sampled a few local things. None of it resonated. My dad was pretty out from it. I think he was kicking and screaming to go to even those samples. Maybe more of a committed atheist at the time than my mom was, although I think she would now call herself an atheist. But that was like a brief sample when I was maybe 9, 10 years old, something like that. And pretty soon after, I probably started to think of myself, maybe not till high school, think of myself as an atheist. The other piece with my upbringing is that my parents absolutely raised us with ethical values at the core of everything that we did. And I'm so grateful to them for that. And I think that's part of the reason that, that I was drawn to ethical culture and humanism. They both worked in public service professions, taught my sister and I that service is perhaps the highest aim that you can have in your life. They both worked with people with disabilities in various capacities. And I remember many, many dinner table conversations of, wrestling with kind of issues of the day, politics, and like environmentalism was big for me as a kid. And they guided that, encouraged that. I got into that. I sort of got interested in politics and youth leadership and stuff like that in high school, middle school and high school. And so I very much credit them with that ethical foundation, that it just didn't happen through any religious or civic organization. It happened in our family and in the way they raised us. And so I'm endlessly grateful for that. Fast forward to college, I became a bit more active politically in protests and kind of social justice organizing stuff. Also met my wife, Lindsay, whom most of you know. in college, and we both were just, our education was expanding on ethical issues and issues of social justice. And she grew up in she shared in this format last year, although in person at Stony Point. She grew up as a practicing Jewish family. I think maybe leaning a bit more secular than religious on the Jewish side, but members of a synagogue, bat mitzvahed, participating in the local synagogue in Bergen County. They lived in Wyckoff. And so she brought that tradition, that rich tradition, to our relationship. And I learned about Judaism through her. I had a few Jewish friends growing up, but I grew up in a mostly like white WASP Boston suburb. And I didn't, so it was not very diverse. I didn't get a lot of those, I didn't meet a lot of folks outside of who were non-white or non-Christian. Learned about Judaism through Lindsay, learned about all of the beautiful traditions there and the deep roots and history that they celebrated through their synagogue and their practice, and shared, we both kind of grew in the sense of how can we be maybe non-religious but interested in maintaining this culture. She taught me, and I learned from her, how we can have the rituals and traditions and family connections through something like Judaism, perhaps without believing in God, for myself. And so that added a layer to my kind of religious education in college, as I learned that through her and had my first Passover Seder, and we continue to do some kind of Passover Seder every year to this day. And fast forward to us in Brooklyn in 2011, we had our first kid. You all know, many of you know Jeffrey and Toby. When Jeffrey was maybe when he was about 3, around the time Toby was born, we began checking out the Brooklyn Society. And I think it had just been through our kind of social activism world, we'd been aware of ethical culture and humanism, but had never set foot into at a platform or a organization. And started going to Brooklyn when our kids were little, loved it, immediately felt welcomed and at home, and really lit up by the intellectual conversations that are going there. We saw that there was a deep community there, but we had tiny kids, and that's a hard time to engage with an education program. And so we went when we could, but they didn't have like a 0 to 3 program at the time. So we went when we could in the early mid 2010s. We moved to Nyack in 2016, in August of 16, and we had been saying when we moved, we're going to have to look around we loved the Brooklyn Society, we're going to look around for a local society. But it had fallen by the wayside as we moved and we're settling into Nyack. And 3 months later, there was a presidential election that you all might remember happening. That was a jarring moment, as it was for so many people. And Lindsay, that Sunday, after the Tuesday election, that Sunday, while we're both reeling, she said, we were talking about finding a society. Let's go right now. Let's get to a platform this morning and be in community with people who are committed to social justice, committed to the long game of undoing some of the things that have elected this person to office. And we went to the northern Westchester, I think it is, in Austining,
Yes.
that Sunday. And that started our next wave of meeting folks in this area. We eventually, a couple of years ago, as Joe said, landed at the Bergen Society. We were looking for something that would bring an education program for our kids, so that we could have them receiving ethical education, have built some roots in community for ourselves, and with wonderful people like you all, thinking about the same kinds of ethical aims, and a practice, that we feel that through politics work, through our professional work, we have community that is ethical, right? That we do have, we do participate in different, diverse, global communities of various stripes, but none of them are, we show up on Sundays, we deal with the issues of the day, we are in it together. It is a committed religion and a committed community and a practice together. And so that's with an education program for our kids. So all those pieces we were looking for immediately felt welcomed when we started showing up at the Bergen Society, like you all, and by you all. Joined a couple of years ago, and we're proud to be part of the community today.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you so very much. We are proud and privileged to have you as a member. That was a beautifully textured and nuanced autobiography. And also I detect a strong endorsement for ethical culture, which is always great to hear. So that's really absolutely marvelous. Thank you for that. That was a very intimate, I think, and nuanced story. Thanks so very much. We move on to our last guest, but I can't resist a little bit of a preface. For 12 years, and this may basically inform many of us, there is an international humanist movement, and it was founded in 1952, and the ethical culture movement was one of the 5 or so founding organizations. And for many years, the headquarters of the International Humanist and Ethical Union was in Utrecht in Holland. It's been for a number of years now in London, but it started in Utrecht. And for 12 years, I was the delegate from the American Ethical Union, our federated organization, to the IHEU, the International Humanist Ethical Union. And we had a good number of our annual assemblies, world congresses in Holland. So it gave me an opportunity to go over there quite a bit. And I have several groups of Dutch friends, the Herrings being one of them. And I must say that that Holland, in terms of what I know about it, has basically 3 faith traditions. You're either a Catholic or Protestant, in which case you don't get along with each other very well, or you're a humanist. I think that humanism, in effect, is a bona fide worldview in Holland. It's recognized, like the established churches, as a religion, and where they do not have separation of church and state, those groups do receive government funding for their support, including the Humanist Group. And for many years, there was a large Dutch Humanist League. I think it's gotten a lot smaller in recent decades, but it may be an over-romanticization, but I sort of see Holland as a humanistic country. If there's a social problem, the Dutch way, I think, generally, is to sit down and say, how can we rationally, if not resolve this problem, at least contain it and minimize it? Now, to some degree, that's fallen away in the face of what is a reactionary nationalism that tragically is sweeping Europe and other parts of the world. But I generally see Holland as a type of humanistic society in general, made up of very decent, kind, friendly people. Of course, there are always exceptions. And indeed, a country that is really committed to a type of rationalism in a way in which I can admire. So, having said that, I'd love to hear Peter Herring's story of where he comes from, whether it's the Catholic, Protestant, or other side, and how he worked his way to a humanist worldview, and then very specifically, how he and Marinka, living in Holland, found their way to the Bergen Ethical Culture Society in Teaneck, New Jersey, which, by the way, for most of you who may not know this, Teaneck was founded by the Dutch. So they're, in some ways, I think Peter and Marinka are actually coming home. Peter.
Yep. I'll give you a short view on my route to where, well, mostly we are now. I'm raised Catholic, actually in a part north of the rivers, whereby indeed in the Netherlands it's north of the rivers is Protestant, south of the river is Catholic, but I come originally from a part of Holland which is an enclave, a Catholic enclave, and raised by my father and mother, and at that time everything was totally, well, restricted to the belief. If you were Catholic, you went to a Catholic school, were on Catholic clubs, everything was divided in various parts. My father actually got his education because he wanted to become a priest and then decided not to do that. And he was quite, as I understood, because he passed away when I was 7. And my mother, who has been an example for me in many ways, She is a chemist like I am myself, and was interested in sustainability. I'll come back to that later. But she was clearly a Catholic, but not in a very strict way. And since I am the oldest son of my mother, there were 4 children from an earlier marriage of my father when his wife passed away. So although I had a scientific background also from my mother, I felt comfortable in the Catholic faith. I was an acolyte, and because it was not very strict, we remained Catholic, and I studied quite some other aspects. I've always been a reader, like books of Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Karen Armstrong, and so when I met Marinka, who actually was studying in the same school, which was a Catholic school. Actually, Marinka knew my mother before she knew me, because my mother was also a teacher of Marinka at the same school. And yeah, when we were married, we raised our kids Catholic. I even become a kind of a lay priest, but more and more because of, well, mostly study and discussion, I didn't feel very comfortable about the Catholic faith, although I did feel comfortable about the good things they were doing, which my mother was very much involved. And I also found it very difficult to get away from the Catholic Church, because my mother had so much support, particularly when my father passed away, also from the church itself. But then when our children were young, they were baptized and did their Holy Communion, but that's kind of where it ended. And then we moved to the US because of my work, which is now 14 years ago. And after 4 months, when we lived in Tenerife, and indeed Tenerife has a large Dutch heritage. The highest point in Tenerife is Haring Rock. We both looked, well, it would also be good to have other acquaintances than from work, and we wanted to understand the US better and also be more socially active. And then the interesting part was that we were both looking at the internet at that time, and I found Socrates Cafe, but Marinka found the Ethical Culture. And by and large, it was at the same address. So we kind of went to the first day in kind of half September, starting with a new season, and we were both feeling very comfortable and actually joined. It took some time for the children to join, because Sunday school has a very negative name in the Netherlands, being very much religious. So children were not that active, although later Robert participated in quite some activities. And yeah, that's how we kind of became active. And I found it really great to be also involved in social action plans. And I must admit, partly was social action, partly also my curiosity. So I visited the jail in near the airport, which I found a fascinating aspect, to have a kind of privately owned jail, which is absolutely unimaginable in the Netherlands. And the harsh conditions there, but also yeah, other aspects. And so that's where we really liked. It was nice for Marinka and the children. I must admit, I was also doing a lot of traveling, but we joined the community weekends and the parties from the skills auctions, which we also organized ourselves. And well, but every nice good things come to an end. So in 2009, we moved back to the Netherlands. But because of my work, where I had to be now and then in the States, I now and then visited still the Ethical Culture Society, which was also planned this year. But last year there was a nice opportunity to renew our wedding vows where, well, we wanted to do that in the Netherlands as well, but due to some unfortunate aspects in my family, because my brother passed away, we did renew that, which actually we both really enjoyed. And we stayed in touch, and I am member of the humanistic organization in the Netherlands, but in the Netherlands it's quite different. It's not so much the humanistic organization, not so much the community. So I am linked to aspects for doing well. I'm actually since a month retired, and my focus of attention is sustainability. And I hope many of you will be interested to see our house, because when we moved back to the Netherlands, we decided we wanted to live in another part of the Netherlands and also build our own fully sustainable house. So my mission is to be the change you want to see in the world, like Gandhi, but also to make the world more sustainable together by taking actions with impact and by inspiring others to do the same. And sustainability is also, for me, an aspect with regard to relationship and interactions with people, to be to be responsible and keep in touch and make sure people do well. Although I must admit, it's not ingrained in my nature. In nature, I am quite a competitive person, and Marinka is more the person who takes care and remembers the birthday, and I find it important. But I've learned that it's important. It's not from my own nature. Not like my mother as well. She's still my my beacon. She's 94, also on sustainability, and she is in a private home where she's doing very well, even to a certain extent enjoying it. And I still like to read about philosophy and social actions, for which I do have more time now, because since a month I am retired, and let's keep it there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so very, very much. Let me just say personally, we're very honored that when you chose to renew your marriage vows, you saw the Ethical Culture Society of Bergen County as your congregational home, even though it was 4,000 miles away from where you live. And we're all very inspired by your commitment, Peter and Marinka, to environmentalism. And hopefully after the pandemic ends, you'll have an opportunity to visit us again. I was really very privileged to be able to visit your home 2 years ago on my last trip to Holland. I'm sure it won't be my final trip, my last trip to Holland, and we'll all have an opportunity to visit your home in just a little while. So thank you very much for telling your story. We do have some time for some questions. So I want to turn the controls back to Rob. Rob, if you can select people who electronically raise their hands. We have about, I would say about 10, 12 minutes or so for questions for our 4 panelists.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to the tour later today. So let's see, does anybody have any questions? I'll be looking also at screens to see if anybody's hand is raised. Oh, we have Ken, go ahead. You can mute yourself. You are unmuted. Go ahead. Ooh, you're unmuted now. Go ahead.
So thanks to all 4 who spoke. It's one of my favorite things every year is to listen to everybody's personal story. This is one of my favorite platforms. My question is specifically for you, Matt. I think you didn't mention it today, but I think that you mentioned having lived abroad early in your marriage, I think it was. And can you tell us a little bit about that and how your ethical background drove you to want to do what you did abroad?
Sure, thanks. We lived in Ecuador for 2 years, from 2002 to 2004-ish. And I would say a couple of connections there. One is we've always been driven to experience other parts of the world and travel, like so many of you. And so something that Lindsay and I committed to in college was to get outside of to live outside of the U.S. bubble. That we knew we wanted to travel a lot, but we also just had some advice, I guess, from older folks who had done this before, to like take advantage of our 20s to do that, because it gets harder as you get older and have kids and careers and things like that. So shortly after college, I left a newspaper reporter job that I did not enjoy, and convinced her to leave a fantastic job at the Arts Institute of Chicago that she did enjoy, so that we could go live in Ecuador. We thought that we would teach English and kind of be backpackers, maybe make enough money to make it sustainable, maybe stay 6 months. We didn't have a long-term plan. We gave up our lease in Chicago. We thought maybe we'll go back to Chicago, maybe we'll go back to another part of the US, maybe we'll stay for a long time, we don't know. And we stumbled into running an eco lodge. So while we were waiting for our English teaching gigs to start, we met some folks who had founded a place called Black Sheep Inn in a tiny village called Chuchilan, in the mountains of Ecuador in the Andes south of Quito, and fell in love with the place, the lodge itself, the town, the people, and called back to the organization in Quito and said, we won't be able to come and teach English, we're gonna stay here. These folks offered us the job to stay as managers, or first as volunteers, but after a couple of weeks they said, you seem great, we really need a vacation, do you wanna be the managers? At the stunning salary of a couple $100s a month. We ended up staying and managing that inn, and then one other for a couple of years, and we still have relationships with folks in the community there. We were just talking about some of them yesterday and how they have been dealing through coronavirus and other pieces. And one other connection there that I think is significant is that it is a major factor. That experience at Black Sheep Inn, which we think of as a social enterprise, it wasn't just an ecological inn, but it was an inn that was committed to lifting up the whole community around it, providing jobs and resources for this small, mostly indigenous and mostly agricultural town. That is a major spark in Lindsay's career in social enterprise, social entrepreneurship. So seeing that a for-profit business could transform a town like that was a big spark for her to come back and say, I would like to go to business school. And so to this day, she's doing, ethical impact in the world of business, partly sparked by that. So thanks for the question, Ken.
All right, great. We have a question from Pam Berglund. Pam, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. I wanted to share my thoughts with both Ed Gross and Allison, because my story was very similar. Now, my parents were Jewish, grew up teaching us important values of living right, but they sent me to Hebrew school and they never went to temple. And what they would do is the only time they went to temple was when they had to do Yiska for their family. But we did grow up with the secular part where we have Rosh Hashanah and we do Passover and Hanukkah and all that. And it was more of a family thing. And then I met my husband, who I fell in love with and wanted to marry. But my parents found out that he was a Seventh-day Adventist. And they were very upset because he said he would convert to Judaism, and then he changed his mind, realizing why would he do that? And it created a lot of problems for us, especially between my husband and my daughter, my mother.
Pam, sorry to interrupt. I'm just curious. Do you have a question? We're just trying to. There are some other questions. Are you getting to a question?
So, Ed, you married a non-Jewish woman, how did it affect your parents? In other words, how did your family react? And I have the same question for Allison. How did her family react?
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Pam. My father didn't react. My mother reacted indirectly, suggesting that we might have problems based on not having similar backgrounds. Our backgrounds were different, not only in terms of religion, but my father was white collar and Diana's father was blue collar. So we had some other differences, but no, the only strong objection came from Diana's mother, who liked me a lot, but she was the most religious of the four parents, and she had a hard time with it, although she eventually came around. I want to mention before Allison talks, Allison, I also got Christmas presents. Although we didn't have a tree, we sang carols and we had Christmas presents, so not so different.
Okay, Allison, sorry, we can't hear you. When there you go.
How about now?
Perfect.
Thinking back to when we became engaged, Lenny and I were both Jewish, but Lenny had come out of a traditional Jewish background, and it was a little too Jewish for my parents, which is kind of hard to understand. Ed, maybe you understand what I'm talking about. I don't know. Lenny's last name was Goldstein, which my maiden name was Balinson, so it was not a name that gave away necessarily my ethnicity. And then when we married, I was thrilled to take on his name, but my parents felt it sounded overly Jewish.
Yeah, you got to deal with that.
The look on Rob's face was the same look on my face. I said, most Jewish parents are so delighted if you marry one of your own. Well, he was a little too Jewish.
So when we got married and we had some Christmas tree celebrations at the Balinson home, I would say to my wife, I go, Christmas tree? I said, you're going to have to explain this to our daughter when we have one, to deal with the Christmas tree, because I'm out.
And my our daughter's 25, and I'm still trying to explain all of this.
And she has embraced Judaism to a certain extent.
Right. Okay, Rob, why don't you call?
Excellent.
Thank you, Allison.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have one more question here from Ron and Lisa. Let me see if I can unmute you. Go ahead and unmute on your screen. There you go.
Hi, everybody. Allison, I just want to say I love your New York accent, and I love your story. But this question that I have is for Matt. Matt, Lisa and mine involvement with ethical culture had a lot to do with our political involvements outside of ethical. So I'm wondering, I know that you're politically active. How much of your political activism influenced you to be a part of ethical, and how much of your ethical experience has influenced you to be politically active?
Yeah, I would say, Ron, that the political activism has influenced us to be part of ethical in that we, like I mentioned, it was the presidential election that got us back after the move. I think the presidential election in 2016 also sparked a new level of political engagement for me, especially. That one thing that I was thinking about, as I was saying, about the values my parents raised me with, they were of that very common belief of like, don't get too into politics. Don't. It's like a game, and lots of money involved, and like it's a horse race, all these things. So I was always aware growing up. I was more than aware. I like met some folks running for Senate when I was in high school and went to forums and that sort of thing. But we didn't, like right now, if you saw Lindsay in my front lawn, it is covered in signs for this primary, somewhat ridiculously. and we're very involved in local electoral politics. And it's a fairly recent awakening for me that like you can't be on the sidelines of this, it's too important. And so I think it's kind of been, it was maybe ethical first in Brooklyn, some level of political involvements and definitely that ethical focus all the way through my life. But we ramped up with Brooklyn ethical culture before. I wasn't knocking on a lot of doors in Brooklyn in 2012. You know, we did a little bit for Obama. I worked at a place called Blue State Digital that, you know, was involved in all of those, but I mostly worked on nonprofits while I was there. So I was always I was a bit on the sidelines of political involvement until these last 4 years when I've really dove in head first. And I think that's something that I'm trying to change in my parenting from what I was raised, is that I don't repeat that message of it's a game and too much money and you know, it's stay out of it, because if you stay out of it, you can get bad results. I think it's, you know, what drives the world can hinge on who we elect at local, state, national levels, and that's been kind of a new doubling down on that commitment in the last few years.
Hey.
Great. Should we take a couple more questions, Joe?
Yes, we can. I have a question of my own, but I'll wait until others have theirs.
Great. Sylvia Acosta, go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much to everybody for sharing today. A common thread I hear, which I hear from a lot of folks coming to our society, is, you know, they were looking for something for their kids. When they became parents, they started to think more about their involvement at a social level, but also as a humanist. So my question, I guess, is for Allison, Lenny, and Peter and Marinka, since your kids are of the age where they might be, you know, parents themselves. Do you see their experience kind of fleshing out the same way, that they're holding to their cultural roots and the religious cultural roots, but also searching for more of a humanist experience for their children?
Who would you like to go first?
Oh, Allison, I think you're just dying to go first. You go, girl.
I think we have just bonded.
Got it.
We have a daughter who is a social worker by education and now is employed as one. And there is no protest she will not go to. I am convinced one day you will turn on your television, and if you hear Rachel Goldstein has been arrested, that's our Rachel Goldstein. She lives in Vermont, and although it's not the most diverse state, she has a Black Lives Matter sign always at the ready. She could be the only one out there in the street.
Wow.
And
good for her. Good for you.
Yeah, I think that Rachel enjoys the socialization of the Jewish holidays, but I don't think she cares very much for the religious part of it. You know, getting together for Rosh Hashanah or having a Shabbat dinner is something that she wants to do because it's a very community-based and very social event. So as Allison was saying, she probably on the other side is more of a humanist than anything else, than you know, being Jewish or religious. Jewish, you know, for the going to Passover with our friends and everything. That's something. It's more of a social event than anything else.
She, if I were being honest, she has probably educated us more than we have educated her.
Yeah.
All right, Peter, do you want to answer there as well?
Is it unmuted? Yes. Well, our point is that
we're having a little difficulty hearing you. I don't know if you had the headset.
He needs
again.
to put the headset back on.
Let's try that one more time. Let's see.
So
This is probably better then.
Much better.
Okay. As Joe mentioned, in the Netherlands, our children are like more than 50% of the children raised without a congregation, which is absolutely normal. Actually, when you have a certain denomination, whether it be Protestant or Catholic, that is actually special these days in the Netherlands. Whether it's humanists, they are clearly socially active, and as I mentioned before, they are interested in sustainability. So my daughter just recently, what she called decluttered, which means that she gave away everything she possessed, and just living from the bare minimum things which you think you do. You only need 100 or 200 things and you can live with that. And my son is, because I'm not totally
vegetarian.
I was not 100% vegetarian. He is, and more I'm convinced that I should be 100% vegetarian, which he is actually already from the time he was in the US. So Robert, for my Esther is thinking more and more about it, and they are actually certainly at their age find possessions far less important than we found when we were that age.
Very good. All right, I think that may be all the time we have for questions, unless
Okay.
with Joe, you have a question.
Yeah, I just have one question actually for Peter again, and it has to do with values. Our values come from our families, but also from the broader culture in which our families are ensconced and themselves socialized. And I want to focus on your commitment to sustainability. I have three sets, as I mentioned, three sets of Dutch friends, and they all happen to be environmentalists. And I can't believe, it's hard to believe that's a mere coincidence. One is involved in basically designing municipal gardens. A second one just retired from a high-level position that was committed to reconfiguring the Dutch national park system. And then there is you. And when I look at Holland, it's the most densely populated country in the world. Land is very scarce. Therefore, it has to be very intelligently and deliberately utilized. Holland, if it were not for your incredible system of 1,500 miles of dikes, 1/3 of the country would be underwater. So there's a great deal of, and I think there probably has been for hundreds of years, a great deal of conscientious and deliberate thought and planning into how indeed land and resources are managed in Holland. And I'm wondering if the general Dutch, if I'm right about that, the general Dutch sensibility, how the Dutch sensibility in terms of planning with regard to land use and so forth has informed Peter, your own commitment to sustainability and environmentalism.
Well, that is part of it, and it's actually fascinating that at least the people who are environmentally active find it a bit frustrating in the Netherlands that actually, if you look at the percentage of energy that is renewable in the Netherlands, is actually relatively small. Perhaps because we don't have any renewable energy from water, because we're a flat country, and we are. So that might be an aspect, but we are very much focused on using our land. And at the moment, the really big debate is whether the Netherlands should really be the country which is the second largest exporter of food, particularly of meat, of pigs and cow, where we are very good in, but that causes a lot of discussions, political discussions, that we're importing a lot of soy from Brazil, feed our animals. The residue from that is kind of in this small country left somewhere, and all the meat is then exported again. So there's lots of discussions on that aspect, because our price of land is probably too high to have these kind of activities. Although the largest, and as you know, I come from the food industry, we think we have the best university with regard to food, but we're not doing that always in the most effective way. Let's keep it here. I could. This is an area where I could dwell on quite some time. And let me not bother you with those kinds.
Okay, well, we look to you to reform your fellow citizens and move them ahead in that regard. There's always room for improvement. Well, I want to thank our four panelists wholeheartedly. I think this has been most fascinating exploration and discussion, and it's not easy to speak in public. When they poll Americans as to what they fear most, it's not being stuck in the elevator or in effect dying in an airplane crash. It's speaking before public audiences. And therefore I have to commend everyone who's been able to overcome perhaps their reservations in doing that. And we're all enriched by having you among us and by learning more about you. And I say, let's do it again. May it continue. So thank you. You have my wholehearted gratitude for what you've been able to share with us this morning. It's been beautiful. Okay, we do, through the magic of technology, have an opportunity to basically solicit a collection from everyone who's participating today. So let me turn it over, I think, to David at this point. Back to David. David, do you want to
Sure,
walk us through
absolutely, yes.
our opportunity for generous giving on Sunday morning?
That's right. In case you miss our collection basket, you can go to the web, ethicalfocus.org/donate, and you'll see our donate button there. And you can donate whatever you want. I will mention that we are charged a 3% fee for the privilege of letting someone donate from a credit card. So if you want to increase your donation a little bit to cover that, that would be nice. If you would like that donation to go to the Tororo Orphans Club that Samantha mentioned, you will need to email, for today, you'll need to email me and let me know that was the purpose. There's no way you can, when you make a donation, you can say what it's for. But if you want it to go to Tororo, send an email to the office, admin@ethicalfocus.org. I'll put that in the chat window. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, we move to the final formal section of our Sunday morning platform, and that is announcements. We've asked you to submit your names beforehand to David if you want to make an announcement. So I know we have a very big and important announcement coming from Lucy Lettuce, but David, why don't I turn it over to you to select our announcers?
Okay, we'll go, why don't we go with Lucy first then?
Okay, go ahead, Lucy.
Thank you both. Okay, you might know about this if you're on our virtual Facebook, private Facebook community, but if not, you probably don't know that we're having a book fundraiser. My husband wrote a book, my late husband, on atheism 3 years ago. I edited the book recently. It's recently published. It sells for around $12 on Amazon, but we're selling it for ethical at the discounted price of $10 a copy. The book is called Atheism. Believe it or not, it is both serious and humorous, has a lot of literary references in it because he was a literature professor. If you would, we said that the fundraiser would last till June 30. So if you'd like to buy a book, send $10 to the society, made out to Ethical Culture Society. Please put Atheism Book on the memo line, and I will mail a book to you. And that's my announcement, and supplies are going fast. So.
Well, thank you. Lucy, we've got to thank you again very sincerely and wholeheartedly. This is a gift from you to the society, and it's absolutely lovely. Thank you so very much. And a lovely way to remember your husband. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. He'd be very happy.
Yeah.
Hey,
thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Diana Gross, you have an announcement?
Yes. Am I on?
You're on. You're on.
I'm on. Okay. This announcement is about our last event for Virtual Community Weekend 2020. And I hope the Herrings know how delighted we are. They have been to so many of our events this weekend. And after platform at 1:30, they will be giving a tour of their sustainable house in Holland and their beautiful garden. And I hope you tune in to see them and to see the beautiful place where they live. Several of our society members have been there. I'm getting ready to plan a trip to Holland myself. I can't wait. And I'm very, very excited about going to their house tour and seeing all the ways that they have made their footprint much less impactful on our environment. So please tune in at 1:30, and thanks again to the Herrings and to everybody who made our virtual community weekend possible. It was terrific. We had a great turnout, as Lisa said, and everybody had a really good time.
Yeah.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, let me just express my commendation to Lisa and Diana. It's been really a great experience. You envisioned it, you organized it, you mediated it, and it's been a grand success. In terms of the Herrings home, let me just say again, I've been there, and just to make things very clear to people who may not get the full concept under their belts, it's a scientific marvel. This is one of those homes in which no energy comes in and no energy escapes. And Holland does not have the most hospitable climate. This is really a marvel of contemporary science married to environmentalism. And I think it's very interesting. Several internal systems, independent of each other, perfectly control the environment without any input or escape of energy. So I really encourage you to take a close look at Peter and Marinka's home at 1:30.
Okay, thank you, Diana, and thanks, Joe. I have two announcements. Also at 1:30, Lauren Orlando will be doing her ethical eating. And today, Lauren will be making vegan banana ice cream. The Zoom information for that, as well as for the Herrings tour, can be found in the weekly announcements that went out on Thursday, and also in the reminder that went out at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning. Second, I would like to draw every member's attention to a new feature on our private Facebook page. Ed Gross is interviewing some members of the society about their lives, where they came from, and how they came to their present situation in life. It's not necessarily about how they came to ethical. And to help everyone find that, I am highlighting it in the weekly announcements. I'm sharing my screen now. You'll see that this is only for members because it's being posted in our private Facebook group. I'm posting the direct links to these interviews, and I know Ed has a fourth one coming out shortly, and I imagine there will be more. So if you look for the section called Announcements, you'll be able to click directly on a link, and it will take you right into our private Facebook group for that interview. And that's the end of my announcements. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're about ready to bring our platform to a close. Before we do, I want to extend our thanks to both David and Rob, who are really our technical engineers on Sunday mornings, what we used to call in high school our audio-visual monitors, updated for the computer age. Thank you, David, and thank you, Rob. So this closes our regular platform, but what we do is we like to stick around for our coffeeless coffee hour. You can grab a cup of coffee in your kitchen if you want, and we'll hang out for a while to chat with each other informally for about 15 minutes or so. Okay, thank you.
Right,
I bid you all a good day.
And Roxy has a poster that she would like to show.
Oh, okay.
Roxy to the Sunday School.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Oh, that's great.
That's beautiful. What is it?
It's people all standing together.
Oh, okay.
Very nice,
Beautiful.
Roxy.
Thank you, Roxy.
Very
That's really great.
I thought it was like peaceful.
That's great. That's beautiful.